Hello guys, welcome to Practical Seminar Tech Blog. I'm Mike Cabalin, your instructor for this series of Linux mail server administration using Zimbra 8 and CentOS 7. On our episode 1, we'll be discussing installing the base operating system and configuration of storage. Let's dive in. Hello guys, welcome to Practical Seminar 360 Tech Blog, episode 1. Installing the base operating system and configuration of storage. Before we dive in on our first episode, I'll explain the network layout and requirements of our setup. We will be using virtual infrastructure, so we need to download Oracle VM VirtualBox Manager, or simply VirtualBox, available for download, and it's open source. Then we need to create 3 virtual machines on our scenario. So we need to create pfSense, anti-spam, and Zimbra. Make sure you have your public domain for your company, or for testing purposes, you can use any domain for the setup, but it will not be available to public unless you buy the domain on any domain hosting reseller company. If you already have a public domain, you need to log in to your public DNS and create a record and C name record pointing to your ISP public address. Hosting your own mail server requires static IP address. Take note of that. So I'll show you how to configure that on our part 2. So let's start with our part 1, installing the base operating system. Create the base operating system using CentOS 7. So all instructions are already posted on our Github repository. All the steps on this tech blog series will be available on our GitHub repo. I'll be adding on the description on each videos. So on our installation of the base OS, we'll be using LBM storage. So LBM is a tool for logical volume management, which is the LBM, and LBM is the command to manage it, which includes allocating disk, striping, mirroring, and resizing logical volumes. So in this VM install, we'll be using 4 10 gig disks as an example for our mailbox storage, and for the operating system disk, we'll have 80 gig. So we'll partition it as 1 gig for the boot and swap 16 gig because I'll be allocating 8 gig for our VM, for our base OS for mail server. So the rule of thumb is twice our memory if it's 8 gig below, but if it's larger than 16 gig, it's plus 4 gig for swap. And for the root, we'll be using all the remaining spaces. And for the 410 gig, for the LBM, we'll be assigning that to our OPT storage. So let's start. So we need to select on our VirtualBox and create a name for your VM. So on my part, I'll be using Zimbra base and type Linux. Then let's select our distro, which is CentOS. or Red Hat. It's the same. So for my memory, I'll be using 8 gig. Then create virtual disk, VDI. So I'll create 10, so it will not get the exact storage and it will take long. So this is my operating system disk. Then we'll be adding the 4 disks, which is the 10 gig for the database mailbox. Okay, so I'll be adding new storage. So select this icon to create a new disk. VDI again, dynamically allocated. And the first 10 gig. Same process. Sorry, I need to rename it to 2. Then we need to select our installer. Which we downloaded from the CentOS website, centos.org. Then select CentOS 7. Then OK. So let's start our Zimbra base. But we need to make sure our network are set to host only. So Zimbra and our mail server and our anti-spam will be using host only because we'll be using pfSense as our firewall, and we'll do the NAT, network address translation, for our internal network for the VM infra. So we'll be doing that on the part 2. So let's start. So select install CentOS 7. So on the language selection, so we need to choose English. Then need to select our time zone. So Asia Manila, done. Then installation, destination. So we'll select 80 gig, which is our OS operating disk. Then I will configure partitioning. Done. So we'll be using LBM. So for our partition table, based on our guide in GitHub. So 1 gig per boot. Then for our swap, so the rule of thumb, if it's less than 16 gig, you need to make the memory twice. But if it's 16 gig higher, you need to add plus 4 gig. So our memory here is 8 gig, so twice it. Double the memory, so 16 gig. Then for our root, so we'll leave the remaining space to the root. So we'll be using the latest file system, XFS, which is the latest and faster file system in CentOS. So let's click done and accept changes. So we'll be creating the LBM disk on the CentOS console after the install. Begin installation. Then for the root password, so we need to set up alphanumeric password, at least 16 characters. So I'll just post it and we'll be back later in configuring the LBMDs on the console of the Linux Minimal. So in this installation, we're using CentOS 7 64-bit minimal only without GUI. So our server will be faster and much secure than the other CentOS with GUI.